Welcome to our study in the book of Revelation. We are currently in chapter 6. So if you have your textbook with you, then open up to chapter 6 and we will go from there. This chapter is all about the sealed judgments. There are, as we've mentioned before, 3 different types of judgments. There are the sealed judgments, of which there are 7. Then there are the trumpet judgments, of which there are 7, and then the bowl or vial judgments, of which there are also 7. So we'll be looking strictly at the sealed judgments this time. Now, we remember from last time that the lamb, the lion of the tribe of Judah, who, when John turned around to look, was a lamb as if it had been slain, but it was standing. And the Lamb took the scroll from the one who's sitting on the throne, who is God the Father. And now we will see what he does with the scroll. So, chapter 6, starting in verse 1. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a loud voice like thunder, "Come!" And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. Now, although some translations have this as the voice saying, "Come see," as if talking to John, but the best texts don't have that word "see." It's simply the word "come," and it's a voice from one of the 4 living creatures talking to the horseman on the white horse, saying, "Come, it's time for you to do your thing." And its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him. Now you notice the rider does not have any arrows. So this is an indication that his conquering will be done without warfare. It will be with the threat of warfare, but there won't actually be any warfare. And a crown was given to him. Now this word for crown, there are 2 words in the New Testament translated crown. One is Stephanos, which is this one, which is a victor's crown, and the other is diadema, or diadem as we would call it today, and that is a ruler's crown. That's a crown that's inherited, given from parents down to children when the parents die. So this is not a ruler's crown, though. This is a victor's crown, which is an indication that this person on the white horse is probably from a country where the ruler is elected rather than one in which there is a succession with the crown. Now there are 3 typical interpretations of this rider on the white horse. The first one, people say it represents Jesus Christ himself. The problem with that view is that Christ is the one opening the seals. So he couldn't both be opening the seals and coming in on the white horse. The second view holds that this is the Antichrist, and that he will gain world power by negotiated conquests until he rules the entire Roman Empire. The problem I have with this is that the riders on the other horses aren't identified as specific people. So to identify this as a specific person, the Antichrist, is a little premature. So the third view is that this rider represents false peace. And that this false peace, because it's a white horse, it looks like somebody coming to rescue, and yet it will be a false peace that will evaporate soon. And he comes in, a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. Now that could be translated as overcoming to overcome. Remember that word is the same one that we saw before in the He Who Overcomes. So, the rider on the white horse we think is simply false peace. And then we get the rider on the second horse. Verse 3, when he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people would slay one another, and he was given a great sword. Now, The red horse, actually the word translated red is puros, which means fire-like. And that's why they translate it as red. Um, its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth. Now the word translated earth is gace or gain, depending on which form it's used. It means dirt or ground or the earth itself. And we will see this later when we talk about the earth dwellers. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth. You notice the rider was permitted to take peace from the earth. So this is Christ himself giving that rider the ability to cause peace to disappear from the earth. And it says so that people should slay one another. This word slay is the Greek verb spadzo, which means to slaughter. So this isn't just typical warfare. This is people getting crazy and for some reason killing each other, and a great many people are going to be killed. And he was given a great sword. There are two words in Greek that are translated sword. One is machaira, and the other is rhamphia. One is a large broadsword that's used for slashing and for cutting heads off. That's rhamphia. The other is a short stabbing sword, like what the Roman soldiers used. And it was simply used for close-in combat. That's the machaira that's mentioned here. And many people believe that because it is a machaira sword, which is used in assassinations, that it may be an indication of the type of killing that people are going to be doing to each other. So that's the second seal. Verse 5, when he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, come. Now notice, in each case, it's been a different living creature. And these are the four living creatures that are around the throne of God. The third living creature say, come. And I looked, and behold, a black horse. And its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. So, as the third seal is broken, this rider on the black horse comes out, and he has a scale in his hand. And these scales were used in the marketplace when you purchase things to weigh out amounts of grain or whatever. And so it's an indication that there's going to be some kind of buying and selling of food. Then the voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures. Where are these 4 living creatures? They're in the throne room, and they're on the 4 sides of the throne. So what's in the middle of them? The throne. God the Father. So he's probably the one that's making this declaration. He said, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. Well, the word quart is koinex, which is a measure. It's not necessarily what we would call a quart, but it's a unit of measure, and it's the amount of food that a person would eat in one day. A denarius, again, is a coin. It's the amount of money, and it's the amount of money that a typical person was paid for one day's work. So what they're saying here is that a quart of wheat will cost, the quart of wheat, which will suffice one person for one day, will cost a person their one day's wage. And that's an indication of how bad the famine is going to be. Now it also says 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. Barley typically was not eaten by people. It was used for animal food, for their horses primarily. It has inferior nutritional quality, but it was a lot cheaper. So again, these are indications that there is a famine coming, which is not uncommon to happen after warfare or mass killings. And do not harm the oil and the wine. There are 2 possible interpretations of the oil and the wine. It could be, since oil and wine were luxuries, that the rich will still be able to buy their luxuries, but the poor won't. Or it could be, since oil comes from the olives and wine comes from grapes, and these are both annual crops that come back year after year and don't have to be replanted, it may be that that's why they were available, whereas wheat was so scarce, which has to be replanted all the time. Because you have to have the seeds to replant wheat, right? And it takes labor to replant the wheat and to harvest the wheat. And if a bunch of people are dead, then it may be hard to find laborers to do that. Verse 7. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and by the wild beasts of the earth. The pale horse, the word pale is the Greek word chloros, which refers to a pale green color. It's the color of grass as it's dying. Okay? It turns kind of a yellowish green. Yeah. It's also the color that was used at the time to describe honey. So again, it's kind of a yellowish green, and that's why they translate it here as a pale horse. The rider on the pale horse is named Death. This is the this is the only rider of the four horses that's named. Okay, his name is Death. And Hades follows with him. Now, the word "with" implies a close relationship. So these two are working together, working in cahoots. And they were given authority. Some people question what is meant by "they," but if you follow the rules of grammar, there's a rule that says, it's the rule of immediate antecedents, which says if there is a pronoun like this "they," and you want to know who it refers to, you go backtrack in the words until you get to the first nouns that satisfy that pronoun. So they, in this case, would have to be Death and Hades. And they were given authority to kill. It's interesting. In Revelation 1, verse 17 and 18, we read this. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead, but he laid his right hand on me, saying, "Fear not, I am the first and the last and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades." And this is Christ that was talking to John. He said, he has the keys of death and Hades. But, according to the book of Hebrews, it says, "Therefore, since the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise also partook of the same," that is Christ, "that through death he might render powerless him who had the power of death," that is, the devil, "and might free those who, through fear of death, were subject to slavery all their lives." So, previously, Satan, the devil, had the power of death, and he could take any life he wanted. And you'll notice when God is talking to Job, when he's talking to the devil about Job, he said, you can do whatever you want to him, but you can't take his life. Okay. So Satan had the power to do that at the time, but God forbid him. Now we see in this example that the power of death only belongs to Christ. So in order for death and Hades to accomplish their macabre task, they had to be given authority to take human lives, and that authority had to come from the Lamb. Now it says they took the human lives with sword, with famine, with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. Well, sword implies warfare. Famine usually accompanies warfare because, again, the workers are killed in an area and the croplands are destroyed in an area, so it's not uncommon to have famine right after warfare. So warfare, famine, and death, implying all natural forms of death, or possibly implying the plague, and wild beasts. Now, the Hebrew word translated pestilence in Ezekiel is deber, meaning a plague. So if Ezekiel is talking about the same event, then death spoken of in Revelation 6:8 may possibly be a plague of some kind. And next comes wild beasts. That's the fourth group of causes of death in this seal. The wild beasts, even today, if all the wild beasts were turned loose, there wouldn't be enough of them on the earth to really cause that much havoc within the human population. So many people believe that this is something other than what we would call wild beasts. I think the best theory is that it would be rats. As we know, rats were the cause of the bubonic plague, and they have been the cause of other plagues. And an interesting note on rats, if you were to kill 95% of all the rats on the earth, how long do you think it would take for them to return to that original population? 1 year. 1 year is what it would take for the rats to repopulate. So, again, the wild beasts, I believe, are probably rats. And they were given authority, these four, over a fourth of the earth. Now, if they're going to take the lives of a fourth of the human population, people on earth, when I wrote this book, or when I was doing the research, it was projected at the time that the population of the earth by the year 2020 would be about 8 billion people. And the latest numbers that I've looked at say there's about 7.8. So it's close to 8 billion people. So assuming that the population at the time is 8 billion, that means that 2 billion people will be killed by these four types of killing. And it's important for us to recognize it's a fourth of the population now, because later on we will see another plague, another incident where a third of the population is killed. And if there's 3/4 of what's left, a third of that is 1/4, so that says after that only half the population will be still around. Okay, verse 9. And when he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. Who are these martyrs? Some people think that they're the martyrs of all time. Others believe that there are the people who were left behind when the rapture happened, who then suddenly became believers and would not submit to the world authorities and were killed for their faith, which is kind of the viewpoint that I believe. And where were they? They were under the altar. Well, the altar is not like a table here with 4 legs that you can see underneath. The altar, remember, typically was made out of stones, and they were piled on one another, and it was this large, solid mass. So how could they see somebody under the altar? Well, if you remember, in Revelation 4:6, it said, there was a sea of glass like crystal before the throne. So the word glass implies a clearness, that you could see through. So before the throne apparently is the whole area is glass. People are walking on a clear floor. And we know that Paul said in 2 Corinthians, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man was caught up into paradise, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And he heard things that cannot be told, which man may not utter. So he was caught up to the third heaven. Now that's the Greek word eos, which means up as far as, but not into. So just up to the third heaven. But then he says, I was caught up into paradise. That's the Greek word eis, which means going from the outside to the inside. So we know from that paradise is up just next to the third heaven, right underneath the glass floor. So these martyrs were apparently in paradise and could be seen from the throne room of God. Incidentally, when all believers die today, they go to paradise. Remember, Christ told the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise. So these martyrs who had been beheaded are in paradise, and they're underneath the throne. And they're saying, Lord, how long until you take vengeance on those who have taken our lives? And they were each given a white robe, which indicates purity. And they were told to rest a little longer. And that's a key phrase, because it says that those who are in paradise are resting. And he said, rest a little while longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete. So these martyrs in paradise are wanting God to take vengeance. Now there's one other word that's interesting there. It's the word Lord. Now the typical word in Greek that's translated Lord is kurios, which means a master or an owner or a lord. This is the word despotes. And we know what a despot is. He's a ruler who has absolute authority. He cannot be questioned. So they're saying, you, Lord, you who have absolute authority, how long until you're going to avenge our deaths? So that's the fifth seal. And that doesn't sound like a judgment, but what it is telling these people that they will be avenged. And the time will come. In fact, in Revelation 10:6, it says, and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what is in it, the earth and what is in it, and the sea and what is in it, that there should be no more delay. So in chapter 10, verse 6 is when we're told that the end of this delay is over and God will take vengeance. Verse 12, when he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake. And the sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. And let me say, before we go further, that word removed is a really bad translation. It does not mean to take out of its place. It means simply to move. So every island was moved in its place, but it remained there. We will find later on one of the other judgments that the islands will actually disappear, one of the vial judgments. Okay, there was a great earthquake. This is the Greek words seismos megas. We know what seismos means. Okay, that's a seismometer is an instrument that measures the power of an earthquake. Megas meaning great. So this is a great earthquake. It's one of, I believe, 6 great earthquakes. spoken in Revelation. Well, there are 4 others in Revelation 8:5, Revelation 11:13, Revelation 11:19, and Revelation 16:18. And he says that the sun became black as sackcloth. Sackcloth was a black burlap-like material that was very dark, and the sun became dark, and the full moon became like blood. Has anyone ever seen a full lunar eclipse? Not a solar eclipse where the sun disappears, but a lunar eclipse. That's where the Earth's shadow completely covers the moon. What? It appears red, yeah. Very faint, but since there is no sun shining directly on it, it's only light that has been bent and able to look at it, and it becomes red. And the stars of the sky fell to the earth as fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved from its place. Now, I recently read a book called The Comets of God. The author makes a very compelling case based on current scientific evidence and knowledge of comets that many of these judgments in the book of Revelation were actually caused by comet. And think about this. If a comet were to pass between the earth and the sun, several things would happen. First of all the particles in its tail would look like shooting stars. Interestingly enough, if it passed between the earth and the sun, in the sky it would cause a darkness, and in the sky it would look like the sky was just turning black from one side to the other. And what does this say? The sun became black as sackcloth, the full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as a fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that was being rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved from its place. So it's very possible that this could be an earthquake caused by the close approach of a comet, and all these other amazing things could be caused by that same comet. Verse 15. Then the kings of the earth, and the great ones, and the generals, and the rich, and the powerful, and everyone slave and free, hid themselves in the caves among the rocks of the mountains, calling on the mountains and rocks, "Fall on us and hide us in the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand?" Now, first of all, notice the 7 categories of people. They were the kings, the great ones, the generals, the rich, and the powerful. Those are all the people that are in power in the world. And everyone's slave and free. That's everybody else. So this is the entire population of the earth is going to do this. They hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks and the mountains, calling in the mountains and rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne." Now, if the rocks were to fall on all those people and kill them, where would they go? They would go to hell. So they'd be in worse shape than they were right then. So that would be terrible. But also notice it says, "Hide us in the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come." What's the great day of God's wrath? It's spoken of in the Old Testament over and over. And it's even spoken of a couple times in the New Testament. It is, in fact, the second half of the tribulation, or what we call the Great Tribulation. Okay? That is the great day of his wrath, the day of the Lord. Okay? For that reason, that happens right after the 6th seal judgment. Therefore, I believe that the 6 seal judgments all happen in the first half of the tribulation. And the 6th one is just before the middle. And we will see the 7th one in just a little bit in the next chapter. So, There we have 6 of the 7 seal judgments. We will get into the other judgments as time goes on, but for now, I want to open it up to any questions you might have.